There are two things you need to know about histograms. The first is when drawing it, you need to calculate frequency density. That's covered in a previous video. When interpreting histograms, the thing you need to remember about when a histogram is already drawn is that the area of each block represents the frequency. So in this question, this area here represents the number of people between 0 and 10. Now the table tells me here that there are 160 people between 0 and 10. The question asks me to use the information to complete the table and the histogram. And I can tell I need to add the scale here to do that. Let's have a look at that block again. So this frequency here is represented by 160 people. As I mentioned, the only thing you need to remember about histograms is that the area of each block represents the frequency. And I've made a note of that there. Okay, so if this area represents 160, well, the base of this rectangle is 10, and I know that 10 times 16 makes 160, and therefore I know that this is 16 on my scale. That's because 10 times 16 makes the 160 that I know that area needs to represent. Now if that's 16, I can very quickly work out that that's 8, and therefore that must be 4 and 12, and I'll put my 20 up there. Okay, now let's try and work out how many people are in the 10 to 25 block. Well, again, remember that the area represents the frequency, and the area of this block is 15, the height is 4, 15 multiplied by 4 is 60. Let's do the third block. The area is 5 multiplied by 8, and 5 multiplied by 8 is 40. Okay, there's now two ways to draw the last part. Again, remember that the area represents the frequency. Well, from 30 to 40, it's going to have a base of 10, and I know that 10 multiplied by 10 will give me 100, so I know this needs to have a height of 10. And finally, the last section has a base of 30, and I know that 30 multiplied by 4 will give me 120, so it must have a height of 4. Of course, the other way to have worked out the height of the bars for the last two sections would to have been to work out the frequency density, which you may recall is frequency divided by class width, and that was covered in the other histograms video. So for these last two boxes, that would be 100 divided by, well, that's got a class width of 10, so 100 divided by 10. And the bottom one's got a class width of 30, so 120 divided by 30. And again, that's another way that I could have worked out that the height of the second to last box should have been 10, and the last box should have been 4. Okay, part B. Now part B asked me to really interpret my histogram to estimate how many people were aged between 10 and 35. If I just add some dotted lines here just to help make reference to this, I can see that all the people between the two green dotted lines are between 10 and 35 years old. Now, bearing in mind this second fact, that the area represents the frequency, the area of this first block here is 15 multiplied by 4, so that's 60 people. The area of the second block is 5 multiplied by 8, so that's 40 people. And of course we actually knew those because those two figures were in the table. Now the area of this last block here is 5 along the base multiplied by 10 the height, and that's 50 people. So in total, how many people are we predicting were between 10 and 35? Well, by adding those numbers up, 60 add 40 add 50, we know there were probably 150. Now the reason this is an estimate is because we don't actually know for these people between 30 and 40 that exactly half of them were between 30 and 35. but we can estimate, and that's why the question asks me to estimate. Okay, your turn now to try the entire question again on your own. Pause, have a go, and then rewind the video by 30 seconds or so to check that you've got the right answer for all parts of the question.